Let me get one thing out of the way right off the bat. This is not a paid review. I actually bought this bike just like I bought every other bike that you've seen on the channel up to this point. I pay for these things out of my own pocket, so if it is a paid review, I'm the one paying to review this bike. Hey guys, you're watching Dirt Bike Channel. I'm your host Kyle Brotherson, and today we're going to be talking about this 2017 Sherco 300 SEF-R. That's right, it's a 300 4-stroke and the thing's pretty sweet. When I got this bike, I had never seen or laid eyes on a Sherco in real life, and so I didn't know what to expect. It's a French dirt bike company, and I worked directly with the importer of those bikes, Clay Stuckey, to get the US importer, Clay Stuckey, to get this bike here to me. And I didn't know exactly what to think about the thing because I'd never ridden a 300 4-stroke, I'd never seen a Sherco, and I was taking some time to get used to it. And what I found was the longer I rode this bike, and with every passing hour that I put on the bike, I liked it more and more and more. Initially, the bike felt very, very skittish and very twitchy on the front end, and that's because it's a woods bike that is made to carve and turn and be light and feel light and nimble, and it certainly did. And for the type of riding that I was doing out here, it was a little bit too unstable. And then with a little bit of encouragement from Clay, he told me to drop the forks down in the triple clamps just about a millimeter or two, and honestly that made all the difference. It turned the bike into a much more stable platform, and I have really enjoyed riding this thing. One thing that is fantastic about this bike is it isn't a bored out they didn't take a 250 motor and bore it out. This was designed as a 300 4-stroke, and it's very torquey, and it gives really good, smooth, linear power. And my favorite thing about this bike actually is the motor. The way that the power is delivered is phenomenal. It doesn't have tear your head off power. It isn't a 450, and that's one of the reasons why I like it. But it does have a very smooth, predictable power that you just get used to. You get used to just giving a fistful of throttle out of a corner or over an obstacle, and it just, the power comes up so smoothly and delivered in a manner that is just good. It's very, very good. And this thing, like I've said in other videos, this thing is no joke. It's more of a woods bike, okay? Let's just get that right out of the way. This bike is good in the twisty stuff, in the tight stuff, when you want to lay that thing over and get around corners and you've got a lot of turns to make. That's where this bike shines. Where it doesn't shine quite as much is out in the wide open desert. Out in the wide open desert, this thing tends to get a little bit of head shake on me. It tends to be not quite as stable as some of the other bikes that I've ridden. So this thing is definitely a purpose-built enduro woods bike, and it does a good job at that. It's got a good 6-speed transmission. It's more of the XCW style gearing where it's a little bit lower first gear, but it's not annoyingly low, so I didn't have any problem with the transmission, and the top speed of the bike was actually very fast, so that was cool. I'll tell you one thing I love about this bike, and that's the motor. It's a great motor. That 300 4-stroke is awesome. It's kind of like the perfect balance between the 250s that everyone has, and then KTM has a 350, and then they've got the 450. Well, this one it's almost like the perfect one because the 250, for some people, I think the 250s are the funnest. The 250 4-strokes are the funnest 4-strokes that I've ridden. But sometimes they can leave just a little bit wanting on the low end and leave you a little bit wanting when you need to loft your wheel over something versus the 350s and the 450s. This thing has a little bit more of that grunt there to get your front wheel up over stuff, and so it makes it really nice. This bike has a really good alternator. It's got a 220 watt alternator, and so that's a good alternator that's going to charge up your battery really well. It'll also run that headlight quite well. It's got a brake light as well on the bike, so every time you hit that front brake, it activates the switch and you get the brake light that comes on. So the alternator was good. Again, we've talked about the battery. I would probably replace it for a lithium ion or a lithium iron battery, but it does have a good alternator. Sherco has designed this bike with a little bit shorter wheelbase, you know, front to back than some of the other bikes that I've been riding, like the KTMs recently. And that makes this bike really, really want to turn quick. It's got different geometry that just makes it nimble. It's very nimble. Now, as you'll see when I roll in the weight on this thing actually came in at a surprising 260.5 pounds on my scale. When it had a full tank of gas and a battery in it. I put nothing on it. It comes stock with a skid plate. It comes stock with these flag style handguards. And so all I did is put gas in it and put it on the scale, and it weighed that much. Well, the interesting thing was it was 25 pounds heavier than the KTM right next to it. But when I rode it back to back with the KTM, this thing didn't feel any heavier at all. Because of the way that the forks work and the geometry and the wheelbase, this thing was light and flickable, and it was really, really surprising. Okay, I'm going to use my shipping scale here and see how much the bike weighs. I filled it full of fuel. That's how I've been weighing all these bikes, because that's how I ride them. It's full of fuel. This doesn't have any aftermarket parts on it. In fact, I've broken the hand guards off, so it's going to be a little bit lighter. Let's see if we can get this up completely off the ground. Okay, so here you have it, guys, 259.5 pounds. When I initially did this test a couple months ago when I got the bike, it was 260.5, but at that time it still had the handguards on it. I've since broken the handguards off, the plastic handguards, and now it's coming in at 259.5. So that's what this commercial shipping scale says. I had a lot of guys that were kind of complaining, saying that's way too heavy for the bike, and I'm going, well, all I've done is put fuel in it and put it up onto a scale, and that's how much it weighs. It weighed quite a bit more than the other bikes that were right next to it on this exact same scale. So whether or not your scale says this exact amount, it is a shipping scale, and I'm using this same scale to weigh the other bike. So if I weigh this bike and then weigh another bike, and this bike is 10 or 15 or 20 pounds heavier on this scale, it is 10 or 15 pounds heavier than those other bikes. So 259.5, but I will say, this thing doesn't feel like a tank when you're riding it. It feels very light and very nimble. I've really liked it. Let me talk about some other wins on this bike. It's got Brembo brakes on the front and rear, and they are good. I have not noticed any drop off in the braking power between this bike or any of the other bikes that I have used. This bike is phenomenal on the brakes, and it's also got a Brembo hydraulic clutch, and the clutch is really, really good. So as far as the controls go, I don't have any complaints. Even with the throttle, on the way that their throttle is, at first I thought it felt a little bit, because it's so light and easy to turn, I almost thought it felt a little bit cheap. But once you ride it, it feels great. And then when you jump back over to another bike, sometimes those other bikes, it feels like they're harder to turn. And so that is a really light and flickable throttle. And you know, they outfitted this thing with some nice stuff. You know, it's even got, this bike even has linkage on the rear end. So some of you guys love PDS style suspension. Some of you guys like linkage. This, you know, you're going to be able to, you know, adjust this thing how you want to. So they outfitted it with a lot of pretty nice stuff. Here's another thing they did right. They gave us a skid plate straight from the factory. I don't know why more bike manufacturers don't do that, especially on these off-road and enduro bikes, because that's the first thing that all of us are going to put on. So kudos to Sherco for giving us a skid plate straight from the factory. I'm not entirely positive if the other bikes, other than the 6 days editions, come with that, but I think they do, so don't kill me there if I'm wrong. Here's one big miss though. Look at this. There's no backup Kickstarter here. I hate that Sherco and KTM and even Yamaha and some of these other bike manufacturers and Honda are taking the Kickstarter off these electric start bikes. I think that is a terrible, terrible idea. I don't care if it takes 2 more pounds to keep the Kickstarter on there. I want the backup Kickstarter, especially since this bike has an old, heavy lead acid style battery, which I don't like either. This thing is super heavy, and it's down here below the air filter. So in order to get to your battery, you got to take your seat off, which this seat is really easy to take off, so I like that. But then you got to take your air filter out, and now right down here in the bottom, down below here, is where your battery is. So you can tell how passionate I am about that, and I don't like that I have to rely on that old crappy battery to be able to start this bike because I got no backup Kickstarter. That's a miss. I do like the seat on the Sherco. This is a cool seat. It's kind of like a grippy seat, and then they've got this stuff back here that really sets it off and kind of helps to give you a little bit more traction. I also like how the seat comes off. I can do it with no tools,
right from the top. So this is really cool. I wish that some of the other bike manufacturers would do that, because on the KTMs you got to take, you know, bolts out. Same with the Yamaha, same with all the bikes that I've been testing, except for this one. See how easy that was? Now that's how I took the seat on and off. So I really like the seat.
Fuel tank is pretty good. It's a 2.56 gallon fuel tank. And I think it's going to give you plenty of range. It's not one of those huge obtrusive tanks, but I think 2.56 gallons is probably enough for most riders to be able to finish whatever ride or whatever race they're on. So I don't have any complaints with the fuel tank.
This is the throttle I was talking about, and at first I thought it felt light and cheap, but after riding it, I really like how it feels because it's so easy to twist the throttle. This is your map switch right here. So if you run the map switch this way, that's your full power. If you run the map switch like that, it takes about like maybe 5 horsepower off the motor. So if you're having trouble with traction or something like that, or you just want to tame it down, you flip that over to the left. If you want it to be back to its fire-breathing self, you flick it over to the right. Everywhere I rode it, I always had it over to the right with the full power of the bike, full power of that motor. But if you were in a traction problem, then you could flip it over that way.
For whatever reason, this bike would not bump start until I hit the starter button. It's almost like the ignition wasn't activated until you bumped the starter. Or hit the starter button, because I could like,
this bike does not like to bump start. It's like, there's so dang much compression. What's going on, man? It's like it won't bump start.
Bog it down hills and wah 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 wah, and it would never fire until I just touched the starter button, and then it was like it would activate the electronics, activate the ignition system, and then boom, and then it would bump start. So it's just kind of weird. I don't know what would happen if your battery was 100% dead. I don't know if it would bump start based off what I saw there. I didn't do that test.
Sorry about the glare here. This is a really nice trip computer. You've got speed, and then over here you've got your distance, and it also is your hour meter to keep track of your total odometers and the total miles on the bike. You can do average speed and max speed. Like today, the max that I got going was 51 miles per hour, and the average speed was 16 miles per hour, doing some single track stuff. So yeah, I like the trip computer on it. I wish other bikes would come with that.
Getting parts for this bike, one of the big worries that people have is they don't see parts for this bike in their parts house, in their local parts house. And that is a concern. However, let me say this. You can get parts through Sherco Off-Road, and your dealer has access to get any of the parts that you need for this bike. And it doesn't take forever. Every time that I've needed anything, I've been able to get it really quickly. Sherco Off-Road, Clay Stuckey, he's been very good. The dealers are plugged into that. So Sherco Off-Road here in the US is carrying all the parts for these bikes. Anything that you need, you're just gonna have to get it through them. So rather than getting it through maybe your whatever parts house that you normally get, you're just pretty much gonna have to go through Sherco Off-Road or your dealer to get parts. And so I'm not overly concerned about that because this is a quality bike from what I can see, but we're gonna break things. You're gonna break levers, you're gonna have different problems like that, and so you will have to get parts. But I think that getting parts from Sherco is actually gonna be a lot easier than you think, because that's been my experience with it.
As far as forks, this thing has the WP open cartridge forks. And these are the forks that came on like XCWs, KTM 3, like the XCW line. And honestly, they feel pretty dang good. They're very plush, and they're very forgiving, really good for trails, really good for woods. And so I don't have any complaints about those. In fact, a lot of guys like these better than the closed cartridge forks. And I didn't have any problems with them, and I thought they performed really well.
I didn't love oil changes on this thing. You've actually got 2 drain plugs under here that you do. First off, you got to take off your skid plate in order to get at those. So you take off your skid plate with 2 bolts. Then you have 2 different drain plugs to pull out. They both have screens on them, which is okay. But you're pulling out 2 drain plugs. You're wiggling it around to get get the oil out. And then you've got a screen here, another oil, a magnetic, actually this is just a magnetic plug. So you pull this one out. So you're pulling out 3 different oil plugs. This is your magnetic one, the ones on the bottom just have screens. So you got 2 bolts on the skid plate, you got 2 drain plugs, you've got another drain plug here, the magnetic one, and then in order to get to your filter, you got to pull out 2 more bolts here to get the chain guard off, so that we can get to our filter, which is up here. Here's the filter, but look, now I've got to have an Allen wrench to pull these 2 bolts out and get to then pull off my oil filter. And so basically what I'm saying is I got 2 bolts for the skid plate. I've got 3 different drain plugs that I'm pulling out. I've got 2 more bolts here and then 2 more bolts here, and now I can get to my oil filter. I just think it's a lot of stuff to do, and you're gonna have to be doing this every, between 5 and 10 hours, depending on how hard you're running the bike, because it is a 4-stroke. So there's a little bit more maintenance work there, which I think could have been designed a little bit better.
As you can see, these flag style handguards are broken, and I broke those today. I didn't dump the bike over. All I did was hit trees with it, and I broke this side and I broke that other side. So these things you're probably going to have to replace within a short amount of time after getting your Sherco. I think that these are just a little bit more brittle than some of the other flag style handguards that I've seen, which is why they broke. I mean, I was just railing through trees and had something come through and smack it and broke it. So I could use a little bit better handguard there, but again, none of the handguards we get on stock on these bikes are all that great. The headlight, I really liked the headlight right up until it stopped working on the first ride that I was on. So I think the bulb just blew, or it just, from the shock or whatever, it just stopped working. It was really bright and it was projecting really far out, and then just boom, 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 bouncing around some stuff, and next thing I know, headlight is out. And now it's got like 2 little lights, so the bottom teeny little light still goes, but the bigger bulb in the headlight, boom, it's off. So headlight was cool right up until it stopped working.
The EFI electronic fuel injection on this bike worked flawlessly. It started great, whether it was cold, whether it was hot. Every once in a while you'd hit the starter and the battery would go and come up on top dead center and not want to pull through. And then I'd just hit the starter again and then it would go right through it. So the bike ran phenomenal, and I had no problems with it there.
Let's talk about tires for a second. These things come with these Michelin Enduro competition tires, and it's an okay tire. I mean, I'm not sure it's the right tire for the Western United States, because I think this sidewall is actually pretty thin, pretty soft. Because I got a pinch flat on this bike, even though I was running 15 pounds of pressure in the tire. I got a pinch flat on it when I was riding hard within about an hour and a half. And I was running 15 pounds of pressure in the tire. So that's another thing. They give you crappy tubes in these bikes. All the bike manufacturers that I know of, they put a cheap little thin tube in there. They should put an off-road heavy duty style tube in these tires. Alas, they didn't, and I pinched it right off the bat. This tire may be fantastic on the east side of the United States. I don't know. The front tire, I'm getting good traction with it. I mean, I don't have any complaints with the front tire, that Michelin up on the front. And I don't have any major complaints with the rear tire here, because I am getting good traction with it. It's just that I think that the sidewall is a little bit, it's kind of like a balloon, almost like a Euro balloon tire or something. It's not breaking down super fast, so I mean, it's okay that way. And again, maybe I'm just on the wrong side of the country, and maybe this is fantastic if I'm in some other place. I like the styling on the bike, and I specifically like this blue frame. It's like a dark purplish blue metallic, awesome looking blue color, and it just kind of sets the whole thing off. So they've done some really nice things as far as styling, in my opinion. All in all, this is a solid bike. I think I like this bike better than the Yamaha YZ250FX that I did last year. I just feel a little bit more comfortable on this thing, and it doesn't feel as heavy. The YZ250FX felt heavier than this bike. This thing just is light and nimble and wants to steer quickly, and I think it has more power. I mean, because it's a 300, so it's got 50 more cc's than that Yamaha 254 stroke. So I really was surprised with how good this. I guess I'm not actually that surprised, but this bike was fun. It is fun to ride, and it's a good bike, and I cannot I can't think of any good reason for you to not do a Sherco. There's a couple little things that I can nitpick on, but honestly, I can nitpick on bikes a lot of different things. But as far as the controls go, it's got a great clutch, it's got great brakes, it's got great power, it's got very nimble handling. It's, you know, what else do you want? I mean, yeah, it's got a little bit of a bulky, you know, silencer back here. I'm not sure that I love where the overflow reservoir is, because it's back here underneath the tire. It's right by the tire. It's under the fender by the tire. I'm not crazy about that, you know, but pretty good package all in all. After riding it as much as I have, I think it's a pretty cool bike.
Hey guys, if you didn't already know, Patreon is the best way to support Dirt Bike Channel. We've got some really cool rewards over there, so click on the link up here that you see to become a patron. That'll take you directly to our site and you can check everything out. You can donate as little as $1 per month and it would really help us out. Thanks a ton, guys.